Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Best of the West Book Club, where Dr. Robillard and I, ex-Eton, ex-Oxford, explore works that we feel are neglected in today's tyrannical, woke academic climate. And today we're continuing with our exploration of Plato's Republic, some bits of Book 8, Book 9, where we explore different kinds of regimes and how democracy in particular slides into tyranny. Dr. Robillard, how are you this week?
Not bad. Thanks for asking. How are you doing?
Yeah, very well, thank you. So, last week then, we looked at some of the different kinds of regimes. What thoughts struck you as especially important from last time?
I would say, really just the slide of degeneration. The general structure that Plato talks about is removing from the philosopher king republic to the Spartan democracy to the oligarchy, which is more concerned with making money, then to democracy, which it becomes not just chasing money, but this just chasing base appetites, and that's sort of where we ended up. So
Yeah,
really,
exactly.
just the direction of travel, I think, is what struck me the most, and how relevant that is to uh, things like Glub or Unwin or Spengler or company have pointed out as well. This and maybe sort of where we are right now in the West.
For sure. And for me, the thing that stood out was that different kinds of political regimes correspond to the dominance within us of
Mm,
different spiritual or psychological components of the human makeup.
right.
I don't agree fully with Plato's tripartite model of the human being, but he's onto something by saying that spiritual states ultimately manifest as political states.
Certainly, yeah. And I guess the main question for that I would wonder is like what's the causal relationship? Is it a chicken and egg thing? Is it looping? Is it the society creates that kind of person, that kind of individual, or is the individual comes first, and then that outward expression is the city or the state.
Mm.
Uh,
Two
yeah.
way. Initial response has got to be two way, but Plato's
Yes. Yeah.
basic thought is the city is the soul writ large. So
Yep.
you mentioned base appetites, and that takes us back to his model of rationality, spirit, and appetite. What do you mean by base then? These are things that motivate people to do what?
Base insofar as serving basic hedonic uh, demands of food or drink or sexual appetites, and neglecting aspects of the intellect or of rationality or of higher goods of the soul. So that's we can see it as the stomach or the genitals being the source of the thinking as opposed to the heart or the head.
Yeah, we're not saying that pleasure is intrinsically bad or the appetites are intrinsically bad. So we have thirst because we need water. We get hungry because we need food and nutrients. We have sexual desire because, as rational animals, human beings, we're supposed to reproduce. These are all good things.
Mhm.
The problem comes when they're not subordinated to reason
Right.
and they go in the driver's seat.
Hmm.
That's when things can easily go off track.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. Individually and collectively.
Right. Okay. And it's that collectively point that we're exploring today with how we
Yep.
can so easily move from liberalism to the tyranny of lust. Let's
Hmm.
begin with our opening prayer from Aquinas, as we do each week. And then we will take here our cameras away so people can join us at home. Let me see if this will go away. There we go. Come, Holy Spirit, divine creator, true source of light and fountain of wisdom. Pour forth your brilliance upon my dense intellect. Dissipate the darkness which covers me, that of sin and of ignorance. Grant me a penetrating mind to understand, a retentive memory, method and ease in learning, the lucidity to comprehend, and abundant grace in expressing myself. guide the beginning of my work, direct its progress, and bring it to successful completion. This I ask through Jesus Christ, true God and true man, living and reigning with you and the Father forever and ever. Amen.
Amen.
Now, you wanted to begin today by just situating Plato's thought within the context of the Republic more broadly, which I think is a great idea. So, before we get into the concepts that we want to address today, building on last time, let's begin with your ideas about Glaucon.
Right. So if we look to book one of Plato's Republic, we see that the jumping off point between this conversation between Socrates and Glaucon and Adeimantus and Thrasymachus, they're not merely talking about what is the ideal or rightly ordered political community, i.e., the state, but they're also talking about what is the basis of ethical action for the individual in terms of ethics. So, book one of the Republic really it frames the entirety of the book and underpins where we end up talking in books 8 and book 9. So in book one of the Republic, Plato sets up a dialogue via Socrates talking to Glaucon and Thrasymachus, and they're discussing conventional morality and asking the fundamental question of what is justice, or why be just if you could get away with it. And pretty much what Glaucon is going to challenge Socrates about is he's going to say, look, morality is it's merely instrumental. It's merely this sort of social contract patty cake game that we all play together in order to get by. But there's no additional reason for us to be moral. You know, put it another way, we could say that justice on Glaucon's account, it's merely instrumental. It's purely instrumental. It's not a good in and of itself. We might think like something like knowledge or health or art, right? Art for art's sake. That these things are all goods in and of themselves, but something like a hammer, it's not intrinsically good in and of itself. It's just an instrument to do, to hammer things. But if you don't have any ends to hammer, then the hammer loses its value.
Sure. And A.N. Whitehead famously said that the whole of Western philosophy is just footnotes to Plato. And that's an exaggeration, but it's got a core point to it. What you're describing there about morality just being a patty cake agreement between people, that is the basis of the modern liberal state, stemming from Hobbes's Leviathan, Rousseau's
Mm-hmm.
social contract. So, on that view, there's no morality or justice prior to the state, and the state is just a contract formed among sovereign individuals. There's no morality in natural law. The state isn't a natural society. So these questions that you're pointing out here for us, they're right at the heart of modern politics, aren't they?
Yeah, certainly. Yep. Yeah, we can feel these reverberating through any sort of modernist social contract theory to where we presently are today uh, with mainstream political theory.
Right.
Yeah, it hasn't the echo of Plato. It hasn't gone away at all.
No, not at all. And there's a really crucial point for people to grasp here that, strictly speaking, politics is a branch of moral philosophy. You can't decide what political action to take unless you decide what is good for man, what
Hmm.
ought your policies to pursue. And to know that, you have to know what is good for man. And that is a metaphysical question. So politics and ethics, they go together, and you're not going to get far doing either without metaphysics.
Exactly. And I think anyone who's followed along with our discussion of Phaser and so far with Plato, we keep coming back to this point that you can't just cleanly separate metaphysics from ethics or metaphysics from politics. These things can't be separated. uh, without knowing what man is, or assuming what man is. We can't have a thoroughgoing political ideology. And I think it's just fast for people to think these things can be fast and erroneous for people to think these things can be so easily bracketed.
Right. And we would even take that up a level and go back to Aquinas's point that theology is the queen of the sciences, and we can't even give full metaphysical answers without
Mm.
revelation. We can go a long
Yes.
way, but for full clarity, we need
Yep.
revelation.
Yep. Yeah.
All right,
Excellent.
Glaucon's challenge then. Talk us through this.
All right. So Glaucon, he's arguing, like I said, that there's two kinds of goods. There's instrumental goods, and that they're goods that are good for their own sake. So knowledge, health might be good for their own sake. Hammer is merely instrumental. Uh, and he argues that justice or morality is of this instrumental kind. So, in other words, morality, it's just a patty cake game that we've all collectively participating in for reasons of pure benevolent self-interest, but for no other additional reasons whatsoever. And he says, well, look, imagine this. Imagine we have this the magical ring of Gyges, and you can put it on and it makes you invisible, and then you can go around and you can essentially act in a way that is consequence free from social repercussions. You can do whatever you want. Sound familiar? It's pretty much what Tolkien borrowed from Frodo putting the ring on in Lord of the Rings. So here we go again. Reverberations of Plato through our art and literature. But the point here, right, is that the Ring of Gyges functions as a proxy for what it would be like to operate in a consequence-free environment. And Glaucon poses this thought experiment to the audience, or to Socrates and company, and says, if you had the Ring of Gyges, there would be no additional reason. There'd be no there, so to speak, that would have any reason giving force or motivating force to compel you to act with any kind of moral restraint. The only reason we act morally, it's merely a prudential calculus, nothing more. Case closed. That's his argument.
So,
So it sounds compelling at first. It's like, yeah, if you could get away with anything, why not?
yeah, you imagine having this ring and the alpha life you could live. You could go and sleep with all the
Yeah,
women.
premium alpha. Yeah,
Yeah,
bro.
ejaculate and evacuate. That
Yep.
would be it, wouldn't it? No one would
Oh,
even know you were there.
you could kill your enemies. You could crush them under your boot.
Yep,
Revenge fantasies. Yeah.
for
Yep.
sure. So we're back to ultimately a kind of moral subjectivism. Is this right? There'd be nothing really wrong with doing that.
Oh yeah, on the Glauconian coin. Yeah,
Yeah,
there's the wrong goes away. Yeah,
yeah.
wrong is removed fully by the ring.
So how to meet this challenge then?
So to meet it, well, first let's pause for a second to see how Thrasymachus adds another nuance to this. He agrees with Glaucon insofar as he thinks that justice and morality is purely instrumental, but he thinks it's not even a good. He goes and pretty much posits a almost proto-Nietzschean view, and argues that, well, look, isn't like morality that's just what the weak and the obedient people do, right? That, there's like a proto-slave morality view, and if you're a moral person, so to speak, you're acting morally, you're really just a dupe, and you're getting exploited by the amorally strong people who pretty much just act in a Lex Luthor kind of way, over and above the conventional moral system. They they see through the the merely conventional instrumentalist account of morality, where the dupes don't. So that's the Thrasymachus's little addition to it.
Right. And what is underlying both of these viewpoints then? is that when you do something bad, you're not ever doing something bad to yourself.
Hmm.
So the traditional view of why it's wrong to torture an animal, say, even though strictly speaking animals have no rights, is that you are perverting yourself by doing
Hmm.
that and
Right.
taking pleasure in it. If I want to spend my days pulling the wings off flies or drowning them in water, then this is bad for my soul,
Hmm.
even though it's not a big deal if flies get killed.
Yeah. Yep.
So, using that example, then, let's look at how Socrates meets the challenge. So, when you do bad things, it's not just about the impact on other people, it's also about what it's doing to you. Is this a fit way for a human being to live?
Exactly. So Socrates, he pretty much responds by arguing that justice, it's not merely instrumental, but it he does acknowledge it is instrumental. Certainly, we do have a social construct or contract. We do get things done by collectively following rules that we've agreed to. But underpinning that, it is a good in and of itself. So in 358, he says, in the highest category, or Glaucon asks him, in which category do you place justice and right? Socrates responds, in the highest category, which anyone who is to be happy welcomes both for its own sake and for its consequences. So he doesn't deny that it's instrumental, but he says it's instrumental as well as good in and of itself. And he pretty much points out that he essentially rejects the the Ring of Gyges premise that one could truly be happy and fulfilled acting in such a way that's contrary to morality. And that in so doing, even if one uh, doesn't get caught, they're still being immoral and wounding themselves. They're wounding their own soul. So the guy with the ring of Gyges, he never really gets away with it because he knows what he's doing. And he's hurting himself by acting against the moral law that's within
Okay.
him.
Yeah. Now, this is the key point, isn't it? So, he is acting against the moral law. And what we mean by that is natural law, as in the contours of human nature, the lines within which we have to work to flourish. So, objectively, when someone is behaving like this is not going to fulfill human nature because you can't have your own meaning or your own morality
Mm-hmm.
where you use the Ring of Gyges to spend all day raping people and stealing things any more than you can invent your own multiplication table.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. Yeah. Then this is where we see once again how morality and reason are they run uh, side by side. They're arguably the same expression of the same thing.
Yeah, that's a really profound point. Morality and reason are different ways of looking at the same thing, insofar as morality is rational action aimed at the final end, final cause of what human nature is,
Mm-hmm.
which is the rational animal.
Yeah.
So, knowledge and virtue, intellect, free will. Great. It's really interesting, isn't it, to see how those fundamental concepts underpin so much of what people talk about nowadays in contemporary political hot topic debates.
They do, but as we've noted, it seems so fractured and compartmentalized. Where you'll have folks helping themselves to Sam Harris appealing to, well, reason shows us that we have no free will, and morality is completely reducible to some physical substrate. And then next thing you know, he's on Twitter railing about the immorality of Elon Musk letting Trump back on Twitter, and we need to decide. We need to decide. We need to use our free will to choose otherwise. So, yeah, we do see all of these elements um, still within mainstream political discourse, but it's very there's a tremendous disunity in a lot of the conversations.
That's it. And this is why philosophy is an important topic, an important subject for people to familiarize themselves with, because, like Thoreau said, read not the times, read the eternities. What we've got underlying current affairs ultimately are really fundamental philosophical questions about what a human being is and what is good for us.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, exactly. And I think it's much of our project is to remind people of those eternities. I think.
Yeah, that's right. Good. Thanks for adding in those concepts. It's a good bridge
Okay.
between
Great.
last
Yep.
lesson and then this lesson. So,
Yeah. Yeah. So just one last point. I think this will become very relevant when we get to tyranny and the soul or the constitution of the tyrant. So I think that's sort of where book one and book nine connect.
sure. Yeah, we'll return to it. So, we want to run through a few ideas that we think are especially important in Plato. And I've got some shortened versions of the quotes up here for people to focus on as we're talking, but I'll read the full ones as we go. So, basically, we're looking at how democratic liberty and equality lead us to what Plato calls the tyrannical soul. He says that as oligarchy changes into democracy, the rulers, owing their power to wealth as they do, are unwilling to curtail by law the extravagance of the young and prevent them from squandering their money and ruining themselves. For it is by loans to such spendthrifts, or by buying up their property, that they hope to increase their own wealth and influence. So, in other words, then, because the rulers owe their power to wealth, they don't want to curtail that whatsoever. So, money becomes God because it's what upholds the ruling class.
Mhm.
And then we're ending up with this cultural effect that this behavior, young people being extravagant and squandering themselves and their money, becomes so prevalent.
Mhm. Yeah, you got to have the bling. You got to have the glow in the dark shoes when you go to the club to fornicate. You know how else? How else? How else are you gonna do it? You know, if I don't have glow in the dark shoes, um, right? I mean, this is yeah, this is
So,
we've seen this before.
consumerism is ultimately slavery on this model, right? This is how people are subjected to the ruling class, because the more they produce, the more you buy, then the more control they have over you because you support their power.
Yeah, indirectly. Yeah, it's like the things you own end up owning you, kind of thing from Fight Club. And yeah, the consumerist man becomes the default citizen.
We can certainly see signs of it now, can't we? It's a good allusion to Fight Club there. That was a big part of that story, which certainly struck
Yep.
a chord with many men because people feel this now.
Yep. Yeah.
So, moving from this, then, Plato says that the purpose of law is to help people towards virtue. But when we can't curtail money making behavior using law, because ultimately the rulers depend on it, law no longer supports virtue. Instead, it
Mm.
supports this extravagance. So
Yep.
Plato's argument is that because of this, it should then be clear that love of money and adequate self discipline in its citizens are two things that can't coexist in any society. One or the other must be neglected. Now, this is interesting because Sir John Glubb, for example, said that money is the principal agent of decline, and the age of commerce leads to the age of decadence. Why can't
Mm.
they coexist, though?
I mean, man's fallen nature, I would suppose. We we have a lot of vices and tendency towards concupiscence and vice. So the more you give money to people, the more opportunity people have to fulfill their vices. We've given the Elvis example last time.
Yeah.
Elvis got what he wanted. Uh, and tragically, he had the money and the power, and put it amplified his vices in a
Mm.
self-destructive way, in ways that probably would have been curtailed if he didn't have such financial means.
There was a Mike Tyson interview when he talked about God giving him everything he ever wanted to see if he could handle it, and he couldn't handle it, and money became a kind of spiritual test.
Mm.
And what you're saying there is that most people are going to fail it.
Yeah, yeah. It seems unless a person has a tremendous uh, degree of self constraint or restraint, and or there's other organic things around them, like family and friends, keeping them in check. Uh, yeah, I mean, how many
Yeah.
celebrities do we see have went down that path
Yeah.
to self ruin?
Yep. This is Aristotle's point about the magnanimous man, literally the great souled man. He'll be wealthy, but the kind of things he'll spend his wealth on might be about temples, for example, theaters,
Mm-hmm.
supporting these big kind of projects. That's not how most people tend to spend their wealth if they get it. They'll buy themselves a Bugatti instead.
Yeah, yeah, and do a lot of cocaine or or whatever. Yeah, that seems to. I mean, there's been like statistics of like lottery winners that they just like years later they spent everything that they had.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's
yeah,
true, isn't it? People say winning the lottery is one of the worst things that can happen to you in life.
right. Yeah.
So part of it as well is that think about what the ideal regime should be, where people are subordinating appetite to spirit and intellect, and the pursuit of knowledge and virtue is primary, and the purpose of work is just to provide you enough to live on while you get on with those more important things. To amass money far beyond what we need to support the virtuous life of contemplation is to place it above the virtuous life of contemplation, because very rare indeed are the men who can devote pretty much every waking hour to the cutthroat world of business and then still have time to pursue their intellectual and moral endeavors with any kind of passion or seriousness.
Mm. Yeah, that sounds right.
The consequence of this is that Plato says the money makers bent on their business continue to inject their poisoned loans wherever they can find a victim, and to demand high rates of interest on the sum lent, with the result that the drones and beggars multiply. This is why usury is a bad thing and often
Yep.
leads to ruin socially.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. It's metaphysically making something out of nothing, uh, in a sense. With yeah, just there's no additional like physical good that's emerging in virtue of just having usurious loan rates.
That's right. And the drone class and the beggars, what we're seeing there is, like we said before, with the way the oligarchs depend on wealth to gain and maintain power, there's a conflict brewing because this drone class is getting bigger and bigger. And not all of them are going to be a threat, but like we said last time, some of them, Plato says, uh, have stings. And these are the ones who are
Mm.
going to agitate the discontent. Because if all the populace is really aimed at is material wealth, well, look at the guys up the top. They've got so much. I want that.
Hmm.
That's the supreme good in life. Why haven't I got what they got?
Hmm. Yep. Yeah.
it's not a common good, is it? It's not something that can be shared without being diminished, like truth, for example.
Right. Yep. Yeah. Exactly. It's zero sum, and it's presumed to be zero sum.
Right. We've got a couple of questions we'll just pause to answer. Run 5 Run says ejaculate and evacuate leads to emasculate.
Yes. Well, that's should be on a T-shirt or a meme or something. That's
Yeah, it should.
well said. Yeah.
Yep. It's a slogan, but unlike most slogans, like alpha fucks, beta bucks, it makes sense. So we need to make that
It
one popular somehow.
That's brilliant. Yeah, because it really does turn the knife at the end and go, oh, wait a second. Yeah, that's the third thing
Yeah.
that's what happens. Oh
Yeah.
yeah, I'm not.
That's that's
Maybe
why
I'm not not the man.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's it. Um it's why the sexual revolution was a honey trap, isn't it?
Sexual liberation is political control. Sexual freedom is the first lie of slavery.
That's the
Free
one.
love is
Yeah.
the first lie of slavery. Yeah.
Now the other one we've got is regarding this point about money, can the same be said for sexuality? The ruling class allows the young to squander and ruin themselves. This is regarding the point we had previously about how money and self-discipline can't coexist.
Okay. Right. Yeah.
Lust and self-discipline can't coexist.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say, yeah, probably even more so, uh, because money ends up sort of being, it's still instrumental, whereas uh, it's still like a 1 degree away from getting the appetite satisfied, whereas love is, or lust is, there's a, I don't know, closer connection between appetite direction, appetite fulfillment.
Yeah, just the nature of lust, I think, is far more likely to enslave you to your impulses and diminish self-control than money is because it's more impulsive. You get more immediate
Yeah.
gratification. I think money tends to be something that you can obsess about, but you at least have to work hard long term to achieve, unless in very
Mhm.
rare cases it's a lottery win. Whereas
Yeah.
lust, there's potential for pretty quick gratification, relatively.
Yeah. Yeah.
Next
Sounds right.
question. Um, Taking the Ring of Gyges concept even further, suppose the victim of a crime committed by the wearer felt nothing during the act, e.g., a rape. I suspect many secular men would deem this morally okay. Is that answer suggesting that the harm, the wrongfulness of the act would depend on the victim being conscious, for example? Let's take the example of someone who's passed out, blackout drunk, and isn't aware that the rape even occurred. Yeah, many secular men might say that what's really wrong with that if nobody got hurt, as it were. They got away with it.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, yeah, this will go back to your basic conceptions of subjective versus objective well-being. Um, but I think most people, if they reverse the roles and like, so yes, imagine that happened to you, but your mind is blank and you have no memory of it. Do you still think that objectively you've been wronged? Or imagine you're being surveilled by somebody without your permission all the time. Or imagine that as you're walking, I don't know, you're walking across someone's lawn, unbeknownst to you, their lawn has been layered with tons of landmines that you happen to be just missing by accident as you walk across their lawn. Uh, Imagine your doctor performs a successful surgery on you while he's totally drunk, but pulls it off. In all these instances, we still most people's intuitions are that you've still been wronged, whether or not you've consciously apprehend it. So I think that's what Plato would or Socrates would agree with.
Right. And to take it one step further, even if you consented to something, the example I like to use to get people thinking is Just like I can consent to my organs being used for donation after my death, what if I consent to my body being used by a necrophiliac after death? Right? I can just say I'm fine with that. Well, is he doing something bad given I've consented to that? If he's enjoying himself and not hurting anyone and I've given consent, on Socrates' view, yes, he's doing something contrary to natural law and it's still bad, even though in a sense it's a victimless crime.
Yeah, yeah. What if someone's your sense of dignity or agency is diminished such that you willfully consent to being a slave for the rest of your life, right? And people go, "Oh, well, he consented." We still think that that's objectively wrong, independent if you've given consent. That there's still something off about that. That's not the right telos of a person.
Right, exactly. There's that telos word again. So, in this society, then, where there's no curtailing of extravagance, where people lack self discipline, and the money makers are injecting their poison loans wherever they can, Plato describes how the oligarchs reduce their subjects to the state we have described, while as for themselves and their dependents, their young men live in luxury and idleness, physical and mental, become idle, and lose their ability to resist pain or pleasure, and they themselves care for nothing but making money, and have no greater concern for excellence than the poor. And the bit I want to look at here carefully is losing the ability to resist pain or pleasure.
Sounds sounds a lot like, I don't know, your description, this description of the I don't know, the modern day soy boy, or these college campus freakouts where these folks are just any type of physical. I think at Oberlin College, the heating went out and the students like lost their minds. So it's like, yeah, there's something about the excessive softness that comes as a side effect of decadence or luxury.
Let's just talk about fasting and mortification a bit here in the
Mm-hmm.
Christian tradition and what they are
Yep.
for. Animals don't uh, fast for long periods of time like human beings do. They don't go contrary to their instincts. I know that I've got cats, I've got dogs. When they're sick, sometimes they won't eat for a while.
Mm.
But in terms of the healthy body, healthy mind, religious discipline, fasting that human beings in pretty much all cultures and all points in history um, have taken part in, that's not something we see. And the point of that is that you are, rather than indulging everything, which ultimately leads to a weakening of your self control because you become impulsive, you're imposing demands on yourself above and beyond what is, strictly speaking, naturally necessary to strengthen the will. So indulgence enfeebles, and then this kind of self control, this strengthens.
Yeah, yeah, certainly. I think
Relating
that's
that to,
also.
yeah,
I was going to say exercise, not just fasting, but yeah, any type of austere exercise. It hits that similar. You're not just strengthening your muscles; you're strengthening your character. As sort of like overused as that and lame that might sound, but I think it's true.
yeah, that's William James's essay, the Harvard psychologist, on habit. He talks about how stroke by stroke we are forging ourselves with our daily habits, and they start small but repeated. They become almost like grooves that we run in, and they've got this
Mm,
ironclad strength to them. So we have to be careful what kind of habits that we uh, ingrain in ourselves.
mm,
And this reminds me of Aquinas's definition of effeminacy as well, which is when someone is either put off by the pain of doing the right thing, or swayed from the right thing by the attraction of pleasure. So, what Plato's talking about here, you can't resist pain or pleasure, is saying that effectively you can't be virtuous. You lack the fortitude to be virtuous. You're too effeminate.
Which sounds like a great description of what you would want a subjugated political class to look like. You would want an easily manipulable uh, class of persons that are slaves to their passions that you can manipulate by that the carrot and the stick.
Right. Precisely it, isn't it? Which is why we like E. Michael Jones's point that sexual liberation is political control.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, I think that's a really important concept. You can become a slave to pleasure and you can become soft, and that can ruin your ability to resist pain. So, what does this young guy look like then when this has worked into him sufficiently? Well, sadly, Plato says the young man's mind is filled instead by an invasion of pretentious fallacies and opinions. He calls insolence good breeding, license liberty, extravagance generosity, and shamelessness courage. He comes to throw off all inhibitions and indulge desires that are unnecessary and useless. So it might sound freeing to throw off all inhibitions. I can do whatever I want. I'm finally free. I can masturbate all day. I can smoke weed. I can fornicate. I can play video games.
Yep.
I'm living the dream.
Yeah, yeah. It's the dream of an amoeba, the dream of a pig rolling in filth.
Yeah, powerfully put. It goes back
Yeah.
to Socrates' point about what the good life for a human being really is. What is our purpose as rational animals? So, indulging desires that are unnecessary and useless, then, how can we have such a thing as an unnecessary or a useless desire? I thought everything's equal, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Heat-ons or heat-ons or heat-ons. Yeah. If you don't have a nuanced or a uh, correct view of the anthropology of man, then yeah, you're just going to get, uh, you know, going to the opera or having a family is, or reading the great works is going to be exactly the same as whatever doing a line of cocaine. It's just various heat on serotonin delivery methods. This is all it ends up being.
Right. So, the point here is that freedom, strictly speaking, is about pursuing what is objectively good for us, but liberty, conceived as license, is just doing whatever the hell you want and imagining that you can make up your own good. You can
Mm.
decide what a human life should look like. So, this view we've got in this quotation here is don't judge me, bro. You do you, I'll do me, and everyone's fine. We each live our own lives, we make ourselves our own heroes.
Yeah, authors of our own conception of our own experiments in living and our own pursuit of happiness. But that, as we saw with Aristotle and Phaser and Aquinas, that comes with the caveat that there are constraints. There are constraints on what a human is, and you can't really veer from that too radically without suffering penalty.
Experiments in Living is J.S. Mills on Liberty, right?
Yeah.
For people who weren't sure where that line came from, I think that's the one. Have a look. Nicholas says in 557D, Socrates suggests that it is in democracy that it is possible to philosophize as he is doing. Is there a tension here? Do you mean only in democracies is philosophy possible? in which case we have to remember that democratic Athens put Socrates to death, and we'll come to why that is shortly, because essentially the philosopher in a democracy that has slid into tyranny and become a slave to lust doesn't want to hear its fundamental values questioned or challenged. So, democracy put Socrates to death. The other point is that we can go back into non democratic regimes, like the philosopher kings, for example, Plato's ideal regime. There's philosophy that's possible there. So I don't think Socrates is claiming that only in a democracy is it possible to philosophize. And I would argue that it became very dangerous for him to philosophize in a democracy as well. And we can look at people getting fired, like myself, for example, and many other people, for raising issues for the kind of open, rational discussion that this liberal, ostensibly free speech society says it invites. But actually, we find out that's for show.
Yeah, it's ironically it's the Chomsky quote about if you want to control a population, have vigorous discourse within a controlled margin or a controlled domain of inquiry, vigorous discourse even, but don't go outside that don't let people go outside that domain.
Right. That's a good question, Nicholas. So, on that note, actually, what we end up with this young guy who throws off all inhibition and indulges whatever desires he fancies. If anyone tells him that some pleasures, because they spring from good desires, are to be encouraged and approved, and others, springing from evil desires, to be disciplined and repressed, he won't listen or open his citadel's doors to the truth, but shakes his head and says all pleasures are equal and should have, Dr. Robillard's favorite phrase, equal rights.
Ah, yes. Whatever those strange metaphysical entities are, who knows? You just say that word, and no one even questions it.
So this modern democratic man, then, he won't open his mind to truth. He thinks that maybe, like Nietzsche said, why truth? Why not lies? Why not live however I want? This is your hedon's point. It's all just pleasure stimuli.
Yep. Yeah. It's just you're just managing different heat-on delivery systems, and yeah, that's that's just reduces man to an amoeba trying to get to the warm side of the petri dish.
And this is, like we said with the lessons on phaser, a consequence of abandoning final causality.
Mm.
So some things are to be encouraged and others to be disciplined and repressed in the light of how human beings should live to fulfill their nature. If we do away with all of that, then we lose any standard for talking about how people ought to behave. That's where we get the so called naturalistic fallacy, where you can't derive an ought from an is, whereas for the Aristotelian and Thomist view, the ought is built into it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
How would you respond to someone then? If you were talking to a friend who had this view, where would you start? It's pretty common nowadays.
It is, yeah. Gosh, I mean, um, I don't know. I don't know where you would start with that conversation. Um, I mean, you could just really keep asking, well, to what end? To what ends are all these things aimed at? And if it's mere pleasure seeking, if it's mere fulfilling of appetites, then nothing more than that, then why are they choosing this? Why are they choosing, I don't know, sex or alcohol? But they have some their own like personal uh, constraints or restraints about hard drugs or something like that, or suicide. Well, why? Why not? Right? If it's merely cessation of pain and um, upping pleasure, then what is the reason giving force between having those standards at all? Why have any standards for anything if it's merely just doing the amoeba thing? Uh, you're merely just chasing pleasure and avoiding pain. Why have any moral standards? And if they do, well, do admit to saying, well, I would go this far, but not over that edge. Well, why, right? And if they said, well, clearly that this is um, it's wrong or it's perverse or whatever, then that at least like gets them to admit that there's something that they're gripping, that they're apprehending as to why there might be a standard there. There's something about human nature or the world or both is providing that differentiation. I think that at least provides a beginning to start thinking, oh, maybe there's a differentiation of goods. It's not just pleasure all the way down.
Yeah, I like that approach. So go for the reductio ad absurdum to snap them out of it if possible. And you can come in
Yeah,
with the sledgehammer point like, okay, pedophilia.
right.
Why
Yeah,
not?
yeah.
Yep.
Torturing animals, torturing kids.
Both at the same time.
Whatever. Yeah, yep. Put
And
yeah, well, yeah,
it's pleasurable.
like, and yeah, and then they go, well, that's clearly wrong. And then if you go, well, why? If it gives the person, more dopamine spike, isn't it good for them?
Mm.
Uh, and yeah, so I think that works as well. That
Yeah.
gets the wedge in the door.
Yeah. So method one, because some of you guys watching probably got friends like this. Number two, you can try to trip them up, get them to contradict themselves, and get them to say something like, um, liberty is good. This is an objective value. And strictly speaking, they've got no grounds for that, no rational justification for it. And if they do hold to that, you can say, but the faculty of the will is so that we can pursue some kind of good beyond itself. The will isn't an end in itself. So what are you aiming at? How do you choose what you want to pursue? And then see if you can trip them up along those lines. The other possibility, in the worst cases, would just be to recognize that you can't reason with corrupt minds and just say a prayer for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. I think that's say a prayer and lead by example.
Yeah, that's it. Because reality has a way of getting the last laugh with these people if they try and live their views out consistently.
Yeah, yeah. We're just gonna look on Twitter for about 2 minutes, and you see that reality coming through in high definition more and more as civilization's collapsing around us.
Yep, that's it. That's how it will work out in the end. Socialist revolution got beaten by reality. Sexual revolution will be as well. All the
Oh,
fantasies break on the rock of reality in the long run,
mm-hmm.
but sometimes it takes a while to get there first.
Yep.
So, reviewing these concepts, then, what we've got is Plato's view that an excessive desire for liberty at the expense of everything else is what undermines democracy and leads to the demand for tyranny. So, liberty then becomes a kind of false idol. And there's that famous book, Liberty, the God That Failed.
Mm-hmm.
And we
Yep.
could also see it as the demon that succeeded because it ends to people ultimately being slaves to their own appetites, their own desires, And as Pope Leo XIII put it in his encyclical on Libertas, the idea that they can make up their own morality, they can decide for themselves new standards of good and evil.
Yeah, yeah. It splinters into tolerance, to pluralism, to this radical relativism. That's,
Right.
as we can see, is inconsistent and self-cannibalizing.
And this is why the idea that tolerance is the Trojan horse of nihilism is
Mm,
important
yeah,
because,
yeah.
well, if nothing really matters at all because anything goes, then who cares?
Right. Yeah. That's yeah, indifferentism towards evil, I think, is where we end up.
That's it. So, in his final reflection on democracy, then, and we'll finish with this. Any questions, send them in now, please. Plato says that democracy reserves its approval for rulers who behave like subjects and subjects who behave like rulers. And this, he says, is true in private life as well as public. And that in such a society, the principle of liberty is bound to go to extremes. In what way, then, are the subjects behaving like rulers? What do we think this means?
Well, I think you can see it certainly within the education system now, higher education, where the students are now barking orders at the petrified, walking on eggshells professors that have been completely cowed by the student mob who are going to tell them how they're oppressors. That's certainly a inversion. Whatever, children disobeying their parents, the younger generation having complete disregard for their elders. Um, uh, yeah, wives bossing around and having no respect for their husbands. Husbands having no spine to stand up and lead their families, or to set any boundaries with respect to their wives. Um, those are a few that come to mind.
Yeah, definitely. And applying that same principle one step up, it's man making himself God.
Ultimately, yes, yeah, yep, yeah. Ultimately, it's the satanic uh, run for dominance,
Yeah,
for the heights
the
of power.
the uh, the devil made the first demand for equality.
The devil was the first Whig, I believe, is the phrase that goes around. Yeah,
Yeah, we got it. All right, good. We covered a lot today. Good questions too,
yeah. Thanks, guys. Good stuff.
and we'll apply this to Rizyard the Gutko's Demon in Democracy next time,
Yes. Yep.
and look at a few comments about criticisms of Plato from Karl Popper and others.
Hmm. Sounds good.
All right, excellent. Look forward to discussing that with you next time.
As always. Likewise.
Thank you. Take care, guys. Bye.
Thanks, guys. Bye.